Imagine you walk into a modern hospital.
Okay, yeah, I'm picturing it.
So you go through those sliding glass doors, right?
Yeah.
And you immediately see just like the absolute pinnacle of physical technology.
Right, the MRIs, the surgical robots, all of that.
Exactly. You've got machines that map the human brain in real time, IV drips, pumping synthesized antibiotics, the works.
It's basically a miracle of engineering.
It really is. But hidden inside that very same building
Right.
is a completely different kind of technology.
Oh, right, the invisible kind.
Yeah, totally invisible. And it actually took thousands of years longer to invent than the MRI machine.
You're talking about the emotional infrastructure.
Right.
Yeah.
I mean, it's the chaplain down the hall. It's the grief counselor on the third floor. It's
Yeah.
the entire concept of palliative care.
Which we totally take for granted now.
We really do. We are so used to thinking about human survival in purely biological terms,
Hmm.
like calories, shelter, avoiding bears.
Yeah, the basic Maslow hierarchy stuff.
Exactly. But we completely overlook these massive, complex systems we've built just to survive our own minds.
Which is a huge task, honestly.
It is. So welcome to the deep dive. Today, we are opening up a profoundly ambitious set of notes we've been given, simply titled Meaning.pdf.
Such a simple title for a really heavy topic.
Seriously. And our mission today is to answer what might be, well, maybe the single most difficult question of human existence.
Let's hear it.
How have humans searched for purpose beyond basic physical survival?
It is a phenomenal question to tackle. Because, the core premise we're dealing with here is that humanity possesses a trait that fundamentally separates us from every other organism.
Right. We aren't just eating and sleeping.
Exactly. We are not merely survival machines. We are interpreting beings.
Interpreting beings. I like that.
Yeah, and if we want to visualize this, picture ancient, crude star charts etched into the walls of a cave.
Like early humans just trying to make sense of the night sky.
Precisely. Now imagine those stone walls slowly dissolving, right? And transforming into the towering steel and glass cityscapes we navigate today.
Wow, okay. That's quite a visual leap.
It is, but that journey from the cave to the skyscraper isn't just a story of physical evolution or, engineering.
It's an emotional journey, too.
A massive emotional and philosophical journey. We had to build ways to interpret the world, or the sheer weight of being alive would have just crushed us.
And that's exactly the mission for our deep dive today. And just to be clear, this isn't going to be some dry, dusty philosophical history lesson.
Oh, definitely not.
We are exploring the emotional infrastructure that every single one of you listening relies on right now.
Right, the tools we use every day without noticing.
Exactly. The goal here is to uncover how humanity actually developed the tools to process grief, find purpose, and build legacies.
And why acknowledging that progress is so vital for your modern well-being.
Yes. So think about your own life for a second. Think about the last time you sat in the pews at a wedding and watched two people exchange vows.
Or the last time you stood in the rain at a funeral.
Right. Or even, the last time you felt totally overwhelmed and just opened up a meditation app on your phone to focus on your breathing.
I think we've all been there recently.
Oh, absolutely.
Oh, yeah.
But the point is, those are not random, isolated activities.
No, they're not. They are highly refined results of thousands of years of human innovation.
All aimed at making life emotionally survivable for you. Okay, let's unpack this. Because the notes outline 6 deep human needs that drive this search.
And that phrase, emotionally survivable, captures the stakes perfectly.
It really does. So looking at this list of 6 needs, it basically covers the entire human condition.
What's the first one?
First, there is the need to understand suffering. Second, the need to face death without total despair.
Those are heavy right out of the gate.
I know, right? Third is the need to belong to something larger than the self. Fourth, the need to preserve memory across generations.
Which is huge for legacy.
Totally. Fifth, the need to distinguish right from wrong. And sixth, the need to turn ordinary, repetitive daily life into something that feels elevated.
When you look closely at that list, you really start to see the underlying mechanism of why we do what we do.
Yeah, what's the common thread there?
Well, it all comes down to the fundamental gap between simply existing and needing that existence to matter.
Because we have that advanced self-awareness.
Exactly. Humans are uniquely burdened with self-awareness. We don't just feel pain, we ask, Why am I in pain?
Right. You need a reason for it,
We know we're alive, which inevitably means we also know that we are eventually going to die.
which is terrifying.
It is. And we possess the capacity to understand that our actions ripple out and affect everyone around us. That awareness generates profound psychological weight.
It's a massive burden.
Hmm.
I was thinking about this, and it's kind of like human consciousness is this incredibly powerful, state-of-the-art smartphone.
Okay, I like where this is going.
But like when we first evolved it, it came with absolutely no apps installed.
Right, blank screen.
Totally blank. There was no manual. So the battery just constantly drains from the sheer anxiety of being turned on.
That is a brilliant analogy.
You have all this processing power, all this awareness of your own mortality, but you have nothing to do with it.
So meaning rituals and philosophies.
Hmm.
Those are the operating systems we had to code just to handle the hardware.
Exactly. We had to code them to stop the battery from draining.
But let's take that hardware analogy a step further. We had to code that operating system without a manual, entirely through trial and error.
And in an environment that was, frankly, actively trying to kill us.
Yes. Before these operating systems existed, early human communities were incredibly vulnerable to pure chaos.
We're talking way back.
Way back. Before any organized systems of meaning, and definitely before any scientific understanding of the natural world.
Life was just constant fear.
Constant fear, rampant disease, sudden famine, and, devastating rates of infant mortality.
Which we'll talk about later because the numbers are wild.
They are. But imagine experiencing a sudden drought that just wipes out your food supply, or a plague that takes half your village.
And you have zero science to explain it.
Right. Without germ theory or meteorology, early humans had to invent spiritual and ritual systems simply to interpret that terrifying reality.
Because if you don't have a microscope to see a virus, a sudden deadly illness just feels like cosmic punishment.
It feels entirely malicious. You need a framework to process that, or you would just collapse from the psychological terror.
You would literally just give up.
Historically, immense suffering was an unavoidable daily reality. Early death, untreated trauma, public violence. People had very few tools for healing.
You just had their family units and oral storytelling, basically.
And it was pretty much it. So out of pure necessity, they began to engineer mechanisms for coping. They created complex burial practices.
They built myths in sacred spaces.
Exactly. They established seasonal rituals tied to the harvest. And these weren't just primitive superstitions to be mocked.
Right, they were survival tools.
Highly sophisticated mechanisms. They organized collective grief, provided explanations for terrifying forces of nature, and fundamentally bound the group together.
So they could survive the harshness of winter.
Exactly. That battery drain you mentioned, the anxiety of existence, it creates immense emotional pressure. Rituals are the architecture people built to carry it.
So once early human societies realized they desperately needed these operating systems to cope, they started building them.
And they built them everywhere.
Yeah, that's what I find so fascinating in the source material, how these systems actually took shape across different parts of the world.
The global architecture of meaning.
Right. The notes show how completely isolated civilizations formulated their own unique answers to the exact same emotional problems.
The diversity of these approaches is truly staggering. But if you look at the mechanics, they all point to the exact same goal of emotional survival.
Give me an example, like the ancient Egyptians.
Perfect example. Their entire societal system emphasized cosmic order, what they called MOAT.
Okay, Mott.
Yes, along with strict moral judgment and, very famously, the afterlife. They engineered their meaning around continuity beyond death.
So the elaborate tombs and mummification weren't just for show.
Not at all. The Book of the Dead, the tombs, these were practical tools designed to ensure that moral actions in this life had eternal significance.
Which perfectly answers that second human need from our list earlier, facing death without total despair.
Exactly. If death is just a transition to another structured phase, it becomes manageable.
But then you contrast that Egyptian focus on the afterlife with how the ancient Greeks operated.
Oh, a very different operating system.
Yeah, the text notes the Greeks explored meaning heavily through reason, virtue, tragedy, and civic life.
Right.
It seems like their system was much more grounded in how you interact with your fellow citizens in the present moment, rather than preparing for a tomb.
The Greek approach was a massive innovation in moral technology, especially their use of tragedy.
Like the plays, their theater.
Exactly. The invention of the theater wasn't just entertainment. when the entire city of Athens gathered to watch a play by Sophocles.
They were doing something else entirely.
They were engaging in a communal grief-processing ritual. They watched heroes suffer terrible, inescapable fates, and they experienced catharsis.
A purging of pity and fear, right. That's what Aristotle called it.
Yes, it was a societal mechanism that taught the citizens, look, suffering is universal. It is not just happening to you.
Wow. So it brought chaos into a structured civic space where it could be managed collectively.
Through reason and empathy, yes.
That makes so much sense. It's like going to a really sad movie today when you just need a good cry, but elevated to like a mandatory civic duty.
That's actually a great way to put it.
And then we have the Indian traditions. The source points out how they developed these incredibly deep systems centered around karma and liberation.
Yes, meditation, spiritual discipline, it is a deeply intricate internal operating system.
Very different from the civic theater of the Greeks.
Totally. The concept of karma, for example, is a brilliant philosophical mechanism for explaining the apparent unfairness of life.
Because it connects cause and effect.
Exactly, across multiple lifetimes, which addresses the human need to understand suffering.
If the universe operates on a moral law of cause and effect, then your suffering has context.
Right, and your current moral choices have profound power. The focus on the liberation moksha was about training the mind to transcend painful physical illusions.
It was an inward journey to find ultimate meaning.
Very inward.
And while the Indian traditions were looking deeply inward, the Chinese traditions took another distinct path.
Yes, focusing heavily on social fabric.
Right, the notes emphasize harmony, ancestral reverence, social duty, balance.
Systems like Confucianism were profoundly rooted in generational continuity. The mechanism of filial piety ensured you always belonged to a lineage.
So you were a link in a chain.
Exactly.
Yeah.
An unbroken chain stretching backward into the past and forward into the future. That directly addresses the need to preserve memory.
And belong to something larger than yourself. It created a highly stable society based on fulfilling duties to your family.
It did. It was a very practical, ethics-driven framework.
Okay, meanwhile, the Abrahamic religions shaped meaning through a totally different framework. Ethical monotheism.
A crucial mechanical change in human history.
Yeah, the text highlights concepts of covenant, law, prophecy, sin, redemption. But ethical monotheism sounds like a dense academic term.
It does sound dense, but practically it was revolutionary.
How did it actually function as a leap in making sense of things?
Well, in many ancient polytheistic systems, the gods were often depicted as capricious, unpredictable, and easily angered.
Like superpower toddlers.
Basically, emotionally volatile, and you had to constantly appease them with sacrifices just to avoid disaster.
Right, just to make sure it rains.
Exactly. Ethical monotheism introduced the idea that there is one single ultimate creator, and more importantly, that this creator is fundamentally just and moral.
Oh, so the universe wasn't just random chaos anymore.
Right. It was governed by a moral covenant. It tied the ultimate power in the universe directly to human ethical behavior.
So meaning was no longer about just appeasing an angry god.
It was about aligning your life with a universal moral law through justice, charity, and redemption.
That is a massive shift. And we absolutely must talk about indigenous traditions as well.
Yes, very important.
The notes explicitly mention how these traditions intrinsically connected meaning to the land, ancestry, oral memory, and ecological relationships.
An operating system where humanity isn't separate from nature, but woven directly into it.
Which relies on highly sophisticated oral traditions.
Yeah, and deep ecological observation. For indigenous cultures, the landscape itself is often a library of moral instruction.
So a specific mountain isn't just rocks.
Right, it's not just a physical resource. It holds the stories of the ancestors and the spiritual laws of the community.
Meaning is derived from maintaining a balanced relationship with the local ecology.
It's an incredibly resilient framework for facing suffering and finding belonging, grounded entirely in the tangible world.
It is just wild to step back and look at this entire global landscape. You have all these vastly different geographies, deserts, mountains, islands.
Completely different tools and climates.
And yet every single civilization was desperately trying to solve the exact same emotional puzzle. How do we grieve? How do we live together?
And what we must recognize is the overarching pattern that emerges from all these different attempts.
Here's where it gets really interesting.
The historical achievement here isn't that humanity found one single final answer that perfectly solved everything forever.
Right. There's no one-size-fits-all.
The true achievement is that we continuously kept asking better, more expansive questions. Over centuries, you can trace how we gradually expanded the scope of our moral concern.
Because in the early tribal days, your moral duty was strictly limited to your immediate kin.
Exactly. If you weren't in the tribe, you didn't matter. But slowly, through these evolving systems, purpose expanded.
To the city-state, the empire, the religious community.
And eventually, it connected to universal global concepts like inherent human dignity and universal compassion.
So how did those leaps actually happen? Because the source lists major turning points, and honestly, a lot of them aren't religious events at all.
Right, they are technological and scientific.
Yeah, the text points to the invention of writing, the printing press, the scientific revolution. I think most of us listening just view the printing press as a better hammer.
Just a physical tool.
Yeah, we don't view it as an emotional or moral leap.
But it is one of the most profound emotional leaps in human history. To understand why, you have to look at the mechanics of memory and authority.
Okay, tell me more.
Before the printing press, sacred texts and philosophical treatises were physically locked away. They were written on expensive parchment, literally chained to library desks.
And controlled by a very small elite.
Yes, a powerful priesthood or an aristocratic class. The average person had to rely entirely on an authority figure to tell them what was true.
They couldn't verify anything themselves.
Exactly. When Gutenberg comes along and democratizes the written word, he essentially democratized philosophy.
Because people could finally read for themselves.
In their own languages. They could form their own individual conscience. They could critically compare ideas. That is a massive expansion of human agency.
It fundamentally shifted the power dynamic of purpose from the institution directly to the individual.
It absolutely did.
And the invention of writing itself, thousands of years earlier, did the same thing with time, didn't it? The text notes how writing allowed the dead to speak.
Yes. Before writing, a brilliant insight or a profound lesson learned from suffering died with the person.
Unless it was perfectly memorized by someone else.
Right. Writing severed the connection between knowledge and a living physical body. Suddenly, the dead are no longer entirely gone.
Their wisdom can speak directly to you across thousands of years.
It was humanity's first successful attempt to conquer time, addressing that core need to preserve memory.
That gives me chills. Writing is basically a time machine for human empathy. But what about the scientific revolution?
Another huge leap.
Because it feels like physics and religion are always framed as being at war with each other. How did learning about biology help our search for spiritual meaning?
They are often framed as enemies, but the source material offers a much more nuanced perspective.
Repair.
By providing reliable explanations for the physical world, science actually relieved an enormous burden from spiritual systems.
Oh, because religion used to have to explain how everything worked.
Exactly. For millennia, religion had to do the heavy lifting of explaining why it rained, why earthquakes happened, why children got sick.
And once science explained germ theory and meteorology,
The spiritual operating systems were freed up. They no longer had to exhaust their energy explaining how the hurricane formed.
so they could focus on how we should treat each other after the hurricane destroys our homes.
Precisely. Science handled the mechanics, allowing meaning systems to specialize in ethics and emotional reality.
That is a brilliant way to frame it. And the notes also mention modern psychology as one of these major turning points.
A revolutionary reframing of internal pain.
Yeah, I guess giving people a clinical vocabulary changes how they view their own suffering.
For centuries, severe anxiety or depression were often interpreted through a purely moral lens, like a spiritual failing or demonic influence.
Which just adds guilt to the suffering.
Right. Modern psychology gave us a compassionate vocabulary. It framed these struggles as health challenges that require empathetic treatment, not moral condemnation.
It expanded our moral concern to include the internal landscape of the mind. That's huge.
It really is.
You know, we are so used to defining technology as physical infrastructure. Bridges, vaccines, microchips.
But this is moral technology.
Exactly. The source introduces this whole different category. And honestly, looking at how complicated the human mind is, building an emotional infrastructure that works is arguably harder than engineering a bridge.
Exponentially harder, because the materials you are working with are human beliefs, fears, prejudices, and the ever-present threat of violence.
Steel is predictable. Humans are not.
Exactly. The text details how humanity incrementally improved life by creating religious traditions with shared ethical codes.
And philosophical frameworks for just societies.
Right. And contemplative practices like meditation, which were essentially early psychological tools to regulate the nervous system.
And it isn't just abstract ideas. The notes highlight physical institutions,
Mm.
public hospitals, early schools, mutual aid networks, grief counseling.
All applied moral technology.
And the list of builders is amazing. Priests, monks, philosophers, sure. But also shamans, midwives, caregivers, and just ordinary families preserving memories.
It required massive, unprecedented, cross-generational cooperation.
To build the temples and libraries we take for granted.
You do not build a global tradition of human rights overnight. It required shared labor and a shared belief that human life inherently deserved dignity.
Okay, I have to jump in here and push back on this narrative.
Go for it.
I want to play devil's advocate for everyone listening because this sounds incredibly smooth and romantic in hindsight.
Like everyone was just holding hands across time.
Exactly, building hospitals and expanding moral concern. But history is brutally messy. Didn't the people pushing for these leaps face horrific pushback?
Your pushback is entirely justified, and the source material explicitly addresses this brutal reality.
It wasn't a universally welcomed evolution.
Not at all. It involved profound, often violent conflict. The reformers who recognized the flaws in their society's operating system and tried to update it, they were fiercely punished.
Right, if you stand up against slavery or oppressive caste systems.
Or demand an end to religious persecution. They were very rarely celebrated in their own time.
If you question the people who hold the power, they don't usually thank you for the feedback.
No, they execute you. Socrates was executed, prophets were exiled, tortured, burned at the stake.
So expanding the circle of moral meaning has historically been incredibly dangerous work.
Because it directly threatens the status quo. And it wasn't just famous martyrs. Think of caregivers who refused to abandon the dying during plagues.
They lost their own lives.
Often, yes. The construction of our moral infrastructure was paid for with staggering amounts of shared sacrifice.
That makes me look at our modern lives completely differently. When you walk into a hospital today and ask for a chaplain,
Or sit down with a therapist.
right, you are utilizing an immense emotional infrastructure that you didn't build. You just walked in and used it.
It was paid for by the risks and sacrifices of countless generations.
You simply inherited the benefits of their struggle.
We inherit a highly developed emotional infrastructure. The vocabularies for grief, legal ethics, freedom of belief, built agonizingly slowly.
It's so easy for us to sit here with our microphones and talk about progress in abstract terms.
Sure, just nodding our heads.
But the source material makes a really bold claim here. It argues we can actually measure this progress with hard numbers.
This is where ancient philosophy and modern science intersect beautifully.
Because for a long time, measuring progress in spirituality seemed impossible. You can measure a bridge's strength, but how do you measure meaning?
But the text points to institutions like Harvard's Human Flourishing Program.
Right. The notes say they study meaning and purpose right alongside financial stability and physical health.
They treat a person's sense of purpose as a hard, quantifiable metric of public health.
Because it actually has tangible outcomes.
Exactly. Strong meaning measurably impacts cardiovascular health, immune response, and overall longevity.
That is wild. And there's also the WHO paradigm shift mentioned in the text.
Oh, the World Health Organization's redefinition of palliative care. This is monumental.
Yeah, they now formally define it as addressing physical, psychosocial, and spiritual problems.
Spiritual problems is officially a medical term now.
What does that actually mean for the patient in the bed?
It means the scientific community acknowledges that suffering is not just a biological malfunction to be fixed with a pill.
It's holistic.
Exactly. It involves the failing biology, the psychology, family dynamics, and the existential search for meaning at the end of life.
You're treating the whole person. Okay, speaking of measurable data, I want to deliver the hard numbers from the text that absolutely stopped me in my tracks.
The demographic shifts.
Yes. Global life expectancy jumped from about 32 years in the year 1900 to about 73 years in 2023.
A massive leap.
And UNICEF data shows a 60% drop in child mortality just since 1990, from 93.5 deaths per 1,000 live births to 37.4 in 2024.
Those numbers represent millions of lives saved.
But how exactly does extending physical life connect back to meaning? Because living longer doesn't automatically mean you are living better.
It connects directly, and the mechanism is time.
Time.
Yes. A significantly longer life gives an individual an unprecedented resource, time to build a legacy, nurture deep relationships, pursue education.
Time to just reflect on your purpose.
Exactly. If life expectancy is 32, you are locked in pure survival mode, just trying to secure calories and avoid fatal injury.
But when it jumps to 73, you have the luxury to ask bigger questions.
Who am I? What is my legacy?
The survival pressure is lifted enough for the operating system to run other programs. And what about that child mortality stat? That one is heavy.
The decline in child mortality is arguably the most crucial emotional shift in modern history.
Because fewer families are dealing with that trauma.
Millions of families are no longer experiencing the world-shattering tragedy of losing infants. Historically, that was a terrifyingly common experience.
And the psychological toll of that relentless grief is immeasurable.
So with children surviving into healthy adulthood, families can invest emotional energy into growth and education rather than constantly processing devastating grief.
That paints an overwhelming picture of how far we've come. We are living in a world with significantly less foundational trauma.
And because of that, our avenues for finding meaning have rapidly expanded.
Yeah, the notes bring up a fascinating Pew Research study on this. It shows that today, 70% of U.S. adults describe themselves as spiritual.
That's a huge majority.
But what really caught my eye is that 22% specifically say they are spiritual but not religious.
That 22% perfectly highlights how modern societies have transformed the landscape of meaning. We haven't abandoned the search, we've diversified.
So traditional religion is still huge, but people are building frameworks elsewhere too.
Exactly. Through chosen families, professional work, deep immersion in nature, creative expression, secular scientific inquiry.
Highly personalized spiritual practices.
Right. They don't have to fit neatly into traditional institutional boxes anymore.
That same Pew study also found that Americans named family as their absolute strongest source of meaning.
Closely followed by religion.
I think that's a beautiful detail. It proves humans build purpose through both grand, cosmic systems, A&D quiet, everyday bonds.
Sitting around a dinner table is part of the same impulse to connect.
And that expansion of meaning didn't just change how we interact with each other, it fundamentally shifted how we interact with the planet.
The ecological connection is a vital part of this story.
Yeah, the text explores how meaning systems shaped environmental stewardship. Historically, cultures treated rivers, forests, and seasons as sacred.
And attributing the sacred wasn't just poetic. It served a highly functional ecological purpose.
Because when you believe a forest is sacred, you don't clear-cut it.
Exactly. It engenders restraint and intergenerational responsibility.
The text lists historical examples, like the protected sacred groves of ancient Europe and indigenous systems of land stewardship in the Americas.
It was essentially a highly effective, built-in conservation ethic millennia before the word conservation existed.
But then science came along and refined this, right?
Yes. Science demonstrated exactly why these ecosystems are interconnected. Ecology made that ancient spiritual impulse empirically measurable.
We can measure biodiversity and track carbon cycles now. Science gives us the how.
But the actual drive to protect those things, the motivation to plant trees or lobby for marine reserves, stems from the why.
Right. The motivation doesn't come from a spreadsheet. It comes from the emotional need to act as caretakers.
We protect what we revere. A spreadsheet rarely moves a person to action.
So the drive for modern conservation is actually a profound expression of human legacy.
Leaving a habitable world for the next generation is a function of meaning, not just biology.
There is a really profound takeaway in the text here. It points out that humanity is obviously highly capable of damaging nature.
We see that everywhere.
But our search for meaning proves we are equally capable of learning from that damage and actively mobilizing to repair it.
We are not just a parasite consuming the host.
We actually have the capacity to act as its immune system. That is a very hopeful framing.
Grounded in historical evidence of our capacity for self-correction.
So this brings up the most glaring contradiction of our modern era.
Let's hear it.
We have all this measurable progress, longer lives, lower mortality, better care, environmental projects. Why does it feel like the world is completely falling apart?
The doom and gloom.
Yeah. You scroll social media for 5 minutes and it genuinely feels like the darkest timeline. Everything is broken.
The source material offers a brilliant psychological explanation for this.
What is it?
It's about barriers that prevent us from recognizing progress. The core concept is the absence of disaster feels normal.
The absence of disaster feels normal. Wow. That is painfully true,
Think of it like a city's IT department. When the servers run perfectly, you wonder why you even pay them.
because their success is invisible.
Exactly. It's only when the servers catch fire that you realize what they do. Moral progress is civilization's IT department.
So when grief is supported and rights are protected,
These massive achievements become invisible background conditions. A functioning hospital feels utterly ordinary.
even though historically it's a massive hard-won victory, nobody wakes up and tweets, "Wow, I didn't die of a bacterial infection today, 5 stars."
We just expect it. We feel entitled to the baseline.
And this is compounded by our brain wiring, isn't it?
Yes, the powerful evolutionary negativity bias. For hundreds of thousands of years, our brains were optimized to notice danger.
Not peace.
Right. Fear and threat demand immediate attention to keep us from being eaten. Quiet charity does not trigger survival instincts.
And modern media understands this wiring perfectly.
They algorithmically amplify outrage because conflict generates engagement infinitely faster than slow improvement.
So people see the conflicts vividly, but completely miss the massive daily operations of charity or the slow march of moral reform.
Exactly. It creates a severe structural distortion in our perception of reality.
Now, I want to pause here and be very careful. As your host, I am just reporting impartially on the source material.
Important disclaimer.
The text absolutely does not wear rose-colored glasses. It explicitly acknowledges that meaning systems have been and are weaponized.
Immensely so.
The notes list catastrophic religious violence, colonialism, misogyny, cult behavior, and institutions protecting their own power over the truth.
It does not shy away from the dark side.
Right. We are not endorsing any ideology here. We are just exploring the objective analysis. These moral technologies have frequently caused severe harm.
And that acknowledgement is absolutely necessary. What's fascinating is how the source balances this heavy ledger with nuance without cynicism.
Nuance without cynicism. How does that work?
Well, the criticisms you listed are entirely legitimate, but adopting a purely cynical framework, reducing all tradition to mere manipulation, is intellectually dishonest.
Because then you have to mentally erase all the undeniable good those exact same systems produced.
Exactly. You can't cherry pick. The text lists massive achievements driven by these systems. Abolition movements, civil rights leaders.
The creation of modern hospitals and universities. Mutual aid during famines.
A purely cynical framework notices hypocrisy far more easily than sincerity.
Because hypocrisy is dramatic. It makes headlines.
Right. Quiet goodness does not. A person mentoring a troubled child or volunteering at a shelter doesn't go viral.
But that quiet daily goodness is the structural fabric of civilization. So what happens if we fail to maintain that nuance and just give in to pure cynicism?
The text highlights a highly destructive psychological danger: learned helplessness.
Which is what?
If a society only consumes stories of corruption, individuals assume humanity is irredeemably selfish. This destroys social trust.
It makes people stop believing improvement is possible.
Even while they benefit every single hour from centuries of accumulated progress.
So it's like doom scrolling until you convince yourself nobody's ever done a good deed. So why bother trying?
It's like burning down your own house because the roof leaks while ignoring that the walls are currently keeping you warm.
That's a perfect analogy. So avoiding absolute cynicism requires us to remember that imperfect systems are the tools we must use to improve.
Civilization rarely advances through unblemished perfection. It advances through messy revision and hard-won moral learning.
There's a great quote in the text. The existence of abuse does not erase the reality of compassion. The existence of hypocrisy does not erase the power of sincerity.
Incredibly powerful distinctions. We must admit human traditions have preserved terrible injustices, but also recognize humans bravely reformed those exact systems from within.
So this leaves us with a massive practical question. If pure cynicism is dangerous, but ignoring the flaws is naive, how do we move forward?
The text gives us an actionable framework: civilizational gratitude.
Holding two competing truths in your mind at the exact same time without losing your balance.
Truth 1. Humans have caused immense suffering. Truth 2. Humans have also painstakingly built beautiful systems of compassion and justice.
The notes say, human beings are deeply flawed, but they are not hopeless.
Yes. Civilizational gratitude is the healthiest form of human pride. But this deep appreciation must never become passive complacency.
Gratitude paired with active responsibility.
Recognizing incredible progress doesn't mean we pretend all problems are solved. It means we know further improvement is possible because we've done it before.
We know the IT department can fix the servers.
Exactly.
And this is where the text points a finger directly at you, the listener. It outlines our inherited duty.
We inherited this vast emotional infrastructure.
Right. You inherited the legal right to your own conscience, access to education, freedom of belief. Now it is your job to protect it.
We are responsible for protecting freedom of conscience, supporting the vulnerable, and reforming harmful traditions without destroying their inherent wisdom.
That really is the overarching lesson of this deep dive. Civilization isn't just built from tax laws and stock markets. It is fundamentally built from meaning.
Humans need reasons to endure pain, ethical duties, and expansive stories that connect their fragile lives to something larger.
And our greatest achievement isn't that we finally became perfect. We aren't. It's that we looked at our mortality, faced our grief, and kept refining the search.
We kept trying to build a better operating system.
That brings us to the end of our journey today. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive into meaning.pdf.
It's been an incredible journey.
We started with terrified humans inventing burial rites under the cold stars and travel all the way to modern palliative care in high-tech hospitals.
We've seen how the desperate need to turn survival into profound purpose has driven everything we value.
It's a remarkable testament to the resilience and moral capacity of the human spirit. Now, I want to leave you with a final provocative thought to mull over.
A little homework.
Exactly. The text makes it clear that meaning isn't a solved math equation. It's an ongoing project, constantly under construction.
The worksite never closes.
You are sitting securely on the foundation painfully built by countless generations before you. So here's the question. What entirely new ritual, new tradition, or new system of compassion are you going to invent or champion in your lifetime? So that 100 years from now, your descendants will simply take it for granted as a normal part of being human. Keep asking the big questions. We'll catch you on the next deep dive.